The inheritance meeting at Hargrove Lake Estate felt like a stage someone had rehearsed to perfection. Preston stood up, tapped gently on his champagne glass like a king preparing to read a royal decree, then flashed a grin so wide it looked ready to tear his face apart. Mom and Dad have decided to hand over all 8 buildings in North Shore to me. Camille, unfortunately, your name isn't on the list. The room exploded. Whistles. Applause. Chairs hitting the floor. Relatives swarmed Preston, patting his shoulder as if he had just been knighted. Elena, his fiancée, lit up like someone had just wired money straight into her account. And me? I didn't laugh. I didn't clap. I simply looked straight at my father. My voice was small but sharp enough to slice the room in half. Dad, it seems like you forgot something. Every sound died instantly. Preston froze. Elena stopped mid-sip. My father stood like a statue, his fork suspended in the air. 30 people went silent, so silent you could hear the air conditioner running. And in that moment, I knew the entire performance they'd staged had begun to collapse. Before I tell you exactly what my father forgot, and how in just one afternoon the entire Hargrove family shattered like falling glass, leave me a comment telling me where you're watching from. I always want to know. I'm not the only one who has ever sat at a dinner table where everyone says love, yet they cheer the loudest when you're humiliated. If you've ever had to swallow your tears and smile while your family celebrated someone else, hit like because what happens next will make them regret clapping so soon. Now then, let me take you back to the beginning. To the place where everything seemed predetermined but was really just waiting for me to flip the entire game. That moment, no one knew whose side they were supposed to be on. The room, loud like a carnival just seconds earlier, suddenly sank into a cold stillness where you could hear the ice melting in glasses. The relatives gathered around the dessert table froze, their expressions caught awkwardly between excitement and fear. The warm yellow lights overhead cast down onto Preston's face, stretching a faint trembling shadow along his collar. Marjorie set her teacup down with a sharp thud. The sound cracked through the silence like a judge's gavel. Preston forced out another smile, but it twisted so strangely even he couldn't possibly believe it. Camille, what did you just say? Elena placed a gentle hand on his elbow, but Preston jerked away as if burned. Howard tilted his head, trying to appear calm, but his fingers were gripping the edge of the tablecloth so tightly the fabric strained. I stood still, not stepping forward, not stepping back, just looking straight at them, letting the silence speak everything for me. One aunt stepped away slightly. An uncle frowned at Preston, as if suddenly realizing he might not be the perfect heir they had imagined. No one said it aloud, but everyone felt the same truth. Camille knew something they didn't. I exhaled softly, resting my hand on the back of a chair. If you want to understand why everything has fallen so quiet, we have to go back to before this story even began. The entire room locked their eyes on me as if I were about to pull down the final curtain. That was the time when they thought I was at my weakest, but in reality, it was when I had already begun preparing for this very day. No one is born inferior, but the house I grew up in taught me to believe exactly that. The Hargrove family had always treated Preston as the chosen one, ever since he first learned to ride a tricycle. I remember that winter snow blanketing the entrance to Hargrove Lake Estate when Preston was gifted a bright red mountain bike. Howard held his shoulders, pride glowing in his eyes like festival lights. And me? I received a faded, overwashed sweater. My mother said, "You fit this perfectly. It saves a lot of money." I smiled, the way every child learns to swallow a feeling they don't know how to name. Every dinner was the same conversations orbiting around Preston's baseball achievements. The phrase, "the future of the family," repeated until it felt worn and empty. I sat at the far end of the long table, listening to the clinking of cutlery, Preston's booming laugh, and the silence inside my own chest. At school, everything played out the same way. Teachers looked at Preston like he was a rising star, while I was treated like the extra shadow in the frame. Once, I won a regional math award, The certificate still smelled of fresh ink. I brought it home, my heart pounding with the hope that someone might finally see me. But Preston barely glanced at it before saying, "That's just number crunching. Anyone can do that." His voice was light and casual, yet sharp enough to slash a long, unseen cut into my pride. Marjorie overheard and simply laughed. "Son, you're right. What matters is that you're stronger." I stood there, feeling as if I had just been erased from my own family portrait. At 16 years old, I discovered I had the ability to look at a page of numbers and instantly understand where the money flowed and how it moved. I loved numbers. I loved the structure of finance, and loved the way assets could create power. But no one asked what I liked. No one wondered what I excelled at. There was only one person who could see through the fog of my family, Eleanor. One autumn afternoon, she called me out to the back porch, where the wind from the lake made the lace curtains sway gently. She placed a stack of real estate documents in front of me. Lease contracts, income expense sheets, and photographs of apartments in West Ridge. "Your mind is as sharp as a freshly honed blade," she said. "People don't see it because they don't want to." I looked up at her, feeling, for the first time in years, truly seen. In the years that followed, every weekend I sat with her on the wooden chair by the window. She brewed mint tea, its scent spreading through the air like a warm blanket wrapped around me. She taught me how to read cash flow the way one reads human nature: honesty, deception, recklessness, manipulation. "Camille," she said, touching my ankle, "your true strength is clarity. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Those words saved me and planted the seed for everything that would come later. At 21 years old, I received a full scholarship to study finance in Boston. No one in the family objected, because no one cared. Howard only said, "If you go, make sure you take care of yourself. Preston is busy with company matters." The day I left Chicago, there was no farewell party, no hug. Only Eleanor was standing at the train station, wrapping a hand-knit scarf around my neck. "Go. You need space to grow." I stepped onto the train, not knowing that this journey was the first step in her secret plan. I never could have imagined the one person who truly saw me would be the same person preparing to hand me the inheritance that would shake this entire family. One phone call from her changed the entire fate of my family. It was a Thursday night in Boston. I was sitting at my desk when my phone vibrated. The screen lit up with Grandma Eleanor. Her voice was slower than usual. "This weekend. Can you come home? I need you to look at something. Only you." No explanation. No small talk. She hung up right after that, leaving me with the unmistakable feeling that something was about to shift. Saturday afternoon. The wind from Lake Michigan swept golden leaves in spirals along the path leading to the lake estate. The familiar wooden house suddenly looked heavier, weighed down by something unseen. She opened the door. She looked thinner, but her eyes were still clear and bright. "Come in, Camille. Today I need you to see everything." She led me into the study, filled with the smell of old wood. The late afternoon sun poured through the curtains, illuminating 2 brown folders laid neatly on the desk. "It's time you knew," she said. The first folder opened to rows of cash flow tables, faded, photocopied invoices, and those familiar maintenance notes. But the numbers didn't add up. Roof repairs were repeated at the exact same cost. Pipe replacement is identical across 3 different buildings. I looked at her. "Preston siphoned money?" She sighed and nodded. I stayed silent to see how far he would go, and to see whether you would notice the truth. Her voice wasn't angry, just the quiet disappointment of someone who had hoped too much for too long. The second folder was heavier. Inside were legal documents, an irrevocable trust, her signature, and my name listed as successor trustee. I read very slowly, each line compressing another breath inside my chest. "You're giving everything to me?" She placed her cold hand over mine. You're the only one who sees the true nature of money. You don't chase it. The afternoon light was beautiful, reflecting off the pages. She handed me a pen. I signed. The sharp click echoed dryly, but to me it sounded like the opening note of an entirely new life. Twilight settled over the lake as we stood on the porch. She handed me a stack of document copies. I'll keep the originals. The rest must be destroyed. I struck a match. The flame caught the edge of the paper, blooming into gold. Ash lifted into the wind, erasing each line one by one. She watched the smoke rise, her voice raspy but firm. What's written on paper, no one can erase. If someone betrays you, they pay for it themselves. I watched the ashes swirl in the wind, not knowing that this moment, the very last moment of peace, was marking the beginning of a family storm. And I had no idea that only a few months later, my own parents would try to use paperwork against me, without knowing that nothing belonged to them anymore. I knew the moment I saw the stack of papers on the table this wasn't a family meeting, it was an ambush. The funeral had barely ended when Marjorie called me. This weekend, can you come home? Camille, the whole family, wants to talk to you. Her voice was soft and gentle, but it felt like silk covering the blade of a steel knife. When I stepped into Hargrove House, the air in the living room was thick, as if someone had scrubbed away every emotion to prepare for a pre-rehearsed performance. Howard sat at the center of the long sofa, hands clasped, trying to look stern. In front of him lay a thick file with a pale blue cover. Preston sat slightly to the right, leaning back with the kind of confidence that suggested the room belonged to him. Elena stood behind him, arms crossed, her thin smile reflecting like glass. Howard pushed the stack of papers toward me. These are procedures to ensure clarity for the future of the family assets. Once you sign, Preston can manage everything completely. I glanced at the first line. Waiver of inheritance and property rights. A polite way of saying you have no rights left. Marjorie immediately jumped in, like she had memorized her lines. Camille, you're strong. You don't need any of this. Preston has sacrificed his whole youth taking care of the family's properties. Sacrificed, I thought. People who burn through money are not called sacrificial. Preston tilted his head. You're in Boston now. We're here, handling everything. Just sign, make it easy. His tone, his posture, the look in his eyes all said the same thing. You're just an obstacle. Elena watched me like she was waiting for me to explode, but I only observed. Their urgency felt like people who feared I knew something they didn't. I placed the file back on the table, aligning it so neatly that Preston frowned. I'm not signing, I said, my voice low but cutting the air clean in half. Preston shot up. Camille, stop being childish. Howard slammed his hand on the table. Enough. You're making things difficult for this entire family. I looked straight at him. I'm simply refusing to do something that doesn't belong to me. The room trembled with chaos. Chairs scraping, Marjorie crying, and Preston grumbling. But I barely heard them, my mind had already moved beyond them. I stood, picked up my bag, and walked toward the door. Behind me came the voices of reproach, pleading, an accusation, a tangled sound I had grown up with. But today, it no longer reached me. I knew that in the moment I stepped over that threshold, they believed I had just destroyed my future. They were wrong. They had no idea. In my suitcase was the very thing that could overturn the entire game. I didn't come to claim power. I came to return the truth to its rightful owner. The grand hall of Hargrove Lake Estate glowed brightly, as if waiting for Preston's coronation moment. Champagne glasses sparkled under the crystal chandeliers. Conversations buzzed, and the faces of our relatives shone with excitement, as though they were attending an official transfer of power ceremony. At the center of the hall, Preston stood like the focal point of the universe, his suit perfectly tailored, his smile full of confidence. Elena held onto his arm, her eyes gleaming as if she were standing beside the rightful heir. The doors opened. I walked in, pulling a suitcase behind me. The sound of the wheels rolling across the wooden floor made several people turn, irritation flickering across their faces when they saw me. The atmosphere shifted as if my presence had broken the rhythm of their celebration. I rolled the suitcase straight to the middle of the room. No one understood what I was doing, but curiosity spread across the hall like ripples. I set the suitcase down. The click of the lock opening echoed louder than necessary. Marjorie clasped her hands tightly. "Camille, what are you bringing here?" I didn't answer. I opened the suitcase. Instantly, the entire room fell silent. It wasn't clothes. It wasn't personal belongings. It was envelopes, sealed documents, and thick papers arranged like I was about to preside over a formal board meeting. I pulled out the first envelope, opened it, and placed it on the table. The deed to Lakeview, my name on it. The second envelope, Glenwood. The third, Ridgewood. And so on, until the 8th envelope, 8 property deeds, all bearing the name Camille Hargrove. Whispers rose like a cold draft sweeping through the hall. "What is that? Camille's name?" No way. I took out the final set of documents, the irrevocable trust, and placed it in the center of the table. The first page displayed the signature of Eleanor Hargrove, along with a notarization from 3 years ago. Eyes darted. Expressions twisted. No one was smiling anymore. The family lawyer, Mr. Pearson, stepped forward. He opened each deed, inspected the ink stamps, checked transaction dates, and cross-referenced them with the county registry. Preston lunged forward to snatch the papers, but Mr. Pearson raised a firm hand to stop him, his expression stern. A few minutes later, Mr. Pearson lifted his head, his face pale. "Everything is valid. Everything has been recorded. The legal owner of all 8 properties is Camille Hargrove. There is nothing left to distribute. No inheritance remains." All sound vanished from the hall. The celebration turned into a funeral. Preston screamed, "No, this is fake. Impossible. She was sick, she didn't know what she was signing." Elena stepped back, her lips trembling. Marjorie burst into tears, clutching her chest. Howard couldn't speak. He stood there, gripping the edge of the table like he was holding on to something, slipping out of his grasp. "She's lying," Preston shouted, grabbing for the documents. "Mr. Pearson held him back firmly. "Everything has been legally verified." Marjorie turned to me, her voice breaking. "Camille, why would you do this? We're family," Howard whispered, almost pleading. "We can talk this through?" "Sweetheart." I looked at all of them, some furious, some collapsing, some too ashamed to lift their heads. They weren't crying because they lost assets. They were crying because they lost the illusion of power. I closed the suitcase. The sharp click rang out like the final punctuation of a verdict. "I didn't take anything," I said slowly. "She left it to me. I'm only keeping my promise." Preston tried to push forward, but no one let him take another step. The entire room stared at me as if witnessing their familiar world crumble for the first time. I walked away, leaving behind a family breaking apart under a truth they never thought they'd have to face. But the true collapse would only begin once the whole city found out. I thought that meeting was the end, but it turned out to be just a comma before the real collapse began. 3 days after the failed coronation, Hargrove Lake Estate received something they never imagined would arrive: an investigation notice from the IRS. Preston was the one who opened the envelope. I wasn't there to see it, but the neighbors recounted it. He stood in the hall, his face so pale they thought he might faint. Every inflated expense he had ever claimed, the yacht, the truck, the Napa Valley trip he labeled as a property inspection, was being re-examined. Accounts frozen. Credit cards declined. Emails demanding supporting documents piled up like mountains. I simply sat in my River North apartment, looking at the list on my laptop of the receipts Preston had once submitted on behalf of Grandma Eleanor, and sighed. I didn't do anything. I just let the truth walk into the light on its own. The first thing to disappear was the yacht. Then Howard's watch collection. Then Marjorie's diamond ring. But the heaviest blow. Hargrove Lake Estate was quietly and desperately put up for sale. The for sale sign stood at the front gate, the same gate that used to open for lavish parties, now reduced to a symbol of defeat. The North Shore Women's League, where Marjorie had once been vice president, no longer spoke her name. None of the relatives visited anymore. The silence they once gave me now returned to claim them. By the end of the month, Howard and Marjorie moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Evanston, low ceilings, old white walls, and windows facing a parking lot instead of the shore of Lake Michigan. Their pride no longer had space in their new home. On the 12th day after the meeting, Preston received another envelope. This time, it wasn't from the IRS. Inside was the engagement ring. No note. No tears. Just the ring lying there a clean, brutal goodbye. People said Preston smashed 2 picture frames, threw his phone to the floor, then sat on the staircase like an abandoned child. He had always believed he held the future in his hands. But in truth, he held only an illusion. That night, I stood on the balcony of my apartment, watching snow fall onto the surface of Lake Michigan. My phone vibrated nonstop, unfamiliar numbers, old numbers, and numbers I once knew well. I didn't pick up. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel satisfied. Just light. I deleted every email asking to talk again. I blocked every family contact. I placed the documents in the safe, then closed it. My silence wasn't revenge. It was simply the distance I should have given myself long ago. But I didn't know what a desperate person might do once they've lost everything. Not every secret is kept to protect assets. Sometimes they're kept to save a person. That afternoon, Chicago was covered in a pale shade of late autumn gold, wind brushing past the treetops along the lake. My phone vibrated. The name appeared. Eleanor Hargrove. Camille, come here. We need to talk. No explanation. No trembling voice. Just a short message, but enough to make me drop everything and drive back to Lake Estate, where she was already sitting in her rocking chair, small in figure but her eyes still as sharp as ever. She placed a stack of documents in front of me. Inflated expenses, fake invoices, and handwritten notes from Preston scribbled in haste. I gave him chances, far too many chances. Then she opened a thick folder, the trust document stamped with a notarization she had scheduled long beforehand. You're not the loudest, but you're the only one who sees beyond tomorrow. I signed. My hand trembled just slightly. The notary stood by the window, late afternoon light, washing over each page as if confirming a promise that could never be taken back. Remember this, Camille. She held my hand tightly. Paper can hold the truth. But words, how long can they hold anything? That night, we burned every copy in the fireplace. The flames flickered across her face, tired, yet peaceful. In our final meeting before she left this world, she placed her hand over mine. You only need to hold on to this. Don't let anyone take what belongs to you. I didn't know. That promise would become the thing that saved me from the storm to come. And I never imagined that very secret would be the one to destroy the entire Hargrove family. 3 months after the inheritance meeting, everything was so quiet I almost didn't realize I was living in the same city anymore. Morning by Lake Michigan, the cold wind brushed across my face, and I felt my heart grow a little lighter. Preston was different. He sold his car, sold his belongings, and sold even the image of the heir he once bragged about. No Elena, standing beside him. No applause. Only one simple truth remained. Reputation is never enough to save someone from their own actions. Howard and Marjorie lived in a small apartment in Evanston. Low ceilings, old walls, and tired yellow lights. No more Hargrove Lake Estate nameplate. No more dinners where they sat at the head of the table. And they no longer called me. As for me, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt peaceful. A kind of peace I had never known while living in that family. And I understood this. Family is not the place you are born, but the place that doesn't erase you. If you've ever had to choose peace instead of the people who claim to be family, you are not alone. And don't forget, like and subscribe to the channel so I can share more meaningful and powerful stories with you. See you in the next video.